Welcome, the Lord's chosen. Be careful who you film. Sometimes the camera captures more truth than the eyes can handle. They thought installing cameras would expose your flaws. Instead, they accidentally produced the trailer of their own downfall. What those lenses caught wasn't scandal, chaos, or weakness. It was composure so steady, it made even the air around you look nervous. Here's the funny part. The footage wasn't supposed to glow. But somehow, every frame of you radiated command, like the house itself had been waiting for your cue to come alive. You didn't just walk through those rooms. You consecrated them. The walls, the silence, even the light knew who was in charge. There's a psychological truth here. When genuine power is recorded, it doesn't look rehearsed or loud. It looks effortless. Scientists once discovered that people can sense dominance in under 0.03 seconds of watching someone move. Imagine what hours of your footage did to their nervous systems. They pressed play, expecting to see a human. What they saw was a frequency. What they heard was authority, translated through calm. And what terrified them most was realizing the camera didn't expose you. It confirmed you. So now, the ones who tried to spy on your life are stuck replaying scenes that remind them of their own insignificance. Irony's cruel like that. Sometimes your enemies pay for the privilege of watching your rise in high definition. Number 1. Your power isn't performed, it's documented. The difference is massive, because when something is performed, it depends on validation. But when it's documented, it's simply recorded as proof of what already exists. That's the unsettling truth about you. You don't act powerful, you just are. And that's exactly why the footage shook them so deeply. The cameras didn't capture someone pretending or posing. They caught someone existing in complete control without trying to control anything. Every movement, every pause, every decision you made was so natural, it stripped away any illusion they had about your power being a facade. They thought they'd catch you slipping, showing cracks, or revealing the real you. What they found instead was that the real you was stronger, calmer and sharper than the version they had imagined. They expected performance energy, big gestures, loud confidence, forced smiles. But what the recording showed was something quieter and infinitely more unnerving, a presence that didn't need to announce itself. You carried that same authority in the silence as you did in the action. And that's what terrified them. Because people who fake power need an audience. People who are power command one without effort. When they reviewed that footage, they didn't see theatrics. They saw evidence. The kind that can't be edited, can't be refuted, and can't be undone. Every frame became a statement. This isn't an act. This is essence. You weren't trying to convince anyone. You were just being. And that kind of authenticity is rare. It's unsettling to those who've built their lives on pretending. That's the thing about natural power. It's not loud, it's not staged, and it's not temporary. It just exists. And when it's captured on camera, it carries a gravity that no lighting, no filter, and no acting class can replicate. What terrified them wasn't just what they saw. It was the realization that what they witnessed can't be manufactured, copied, or controlled. The recording didn't glorify you. It validated you. It became irrefutable proof that your energy doesn't depend on applause. Even when no one's watching, the room still bends around your presence. And that, right there, is what truly unsettles them. They thought they were documenting a person. They were actually documenting power in its rawest form. Number 2, they expected a spectacle, but what they found was evidence. That's what changed everything. They came prepared to mock, to analyze, to collect moments they could twist into weakness. But what the recording gave them was something they couldn't spin or deny. They saw proof, the kind that doesn't argue, doesn't explain, and doesn't need defense. The footage didn't show chaos or pretense, it showed presence. Every frame said without words, "This is real." The funny part is, they thought they were watching entertainment. They were looking for performance energy, waiting for something dramatic they could turn into gossip. But instead of finding a show, they stumbled onto a mirror, one that reflected their own insecurity back at them. They saw what power looks like when it isn't staged. It unsettled them because deep down, they knew they couldn't fake what came naturally to you. That's the thing about real strength. It doesn't shout. It reveals itself through calm consistency. The cameras showed how you move through your space with quiet authority, how you make decisions without hesitation, and how your peace doesn't crack under pressure. That wasn't a script. It was the truth. And truth is dangerous to people who live off illusion. They didn't realize they were recording evidence of something bigger, proof that you don't need to perform to dominate. Everything about you was unscripted, yet everything aligned. Your tone, your timing, even your silence carried more conviction than their loudest efforts. What terrified them wasn't that you were strong, but that your strength didn't need validation. That's when they understood they weren't watching a person trying to impress. They were witnessing someone who had already arrived. When the footage ended, they didn't just see what you did. They saw who they weren't. That's the part that stings. They went looking for drama, and instead they found stillness that exposed their own noise. The recording became a quiet verdict. All this time, they had underestimated you, and now they had proof that they were wrong. They wanted a show to critique. What they got was documentation that you're untouchable. The evidence stood on its own, raw and undeniable. And that's what haunts them. They can't unsee it, and they can't undo the fact that their attempt to expose you only revealed how real your power truly is. Number 3, the footage didn't highlight your speeches. It captured the gravitational pull you exert without uttering a syllable. That's the difference between influence and authority. Influence tries to persuade. Authority simply exists and shifts the room without effort. In the recording, your power wasn't coming from anything you said. It wasn't built on clever words, dramatic statements, or scripted moves. It came from the way you were present, the quiet weight of someone who knows exactly who they are. That's what unsettled them. People are used to power being loud and flashy. They expect someone trying to control the narrative, someone constantly projecting confidence to convince others they're in charge. But you didn't do any of that. You weren't performing or posturing. Your energy did the speaking for you. The more they watched, the more they realized they weren't just seeing a person. They were feeling a force. What's rare and terrifying for those who rely on image is how steady your presence was. The footage showed no cracks, no desperation to impress, no forced dominance. It was natural, it was quiet, but it was undeniable. That's what real power looks like when it's not trying to be seen. It draws people in without lifting a finger, and once they're in, they can't pull away. Even the small things revealed this gravity. The way you carried yourself, the way you paused, the way you allowed silence to stretch without needing to fill it. Those were the details the cameras caught, and they were louder than any speech could have been. That kind of calm isn't emptiness. It's control, it's clarity. It's the sort of authority that doesn't have to argue because it has nothing to prove. What they witnessed was the difference between power built on perception and power built on presence. Perception fades when the audience changes. Presence remains no matter who's watching, and in the footage, your presence was undeniable. They realized your strength wasn't about what you could say or do, it was about who you already were. That's why the recording unsettled them. It didn't show you trying to dominate. It showed that domination had already happened, and you didn't even need words to make it real. Number 4, they wanted weakness. The cameras showed sovereignty. That was the turning point, the moment their whole strategy collapsed under the weight of reality. They came prepared to dissect you, to pull apart every movement, every pause, every expression in search of a flaw they could magnify. They weren't just hoping for a mistake, they were depending on it. Without your weakness, their narrative couldn't stand. But the footage betrayed them. Instead of cracks, it revealed composure so complete it looked almost unshakable. What unsettled them most wasn't just the absence of vulnerability. It was the presence of authority, not the kind that's borrowed from a title or a stage or a crowd, but the kind that can't be granted or taken away. The recording captured sovereignty in its purest form, calm, grounded, and in command without effort. It showed them that their assumptions weren't just wrong, they were small. They had underestimated you not because they miscalculated, but because they lacked the capacity to understand what they were looking at. This is the part that stings them the most. People can dismiss power they think is fake. They can ridicule confidence they believe is forced. But when it's authentic, when it's recorded without filters or scripts, it becomes evidence. Evidence they can't argue with, evidence they can't twist, evidence they can't destroy. They thought the cameras would be their weapon. Instead, the cameras became your witness. Every second of that footage underlined one truth they've been avoiding. You don't need to hide behind perfection because your strength isn't about appearances, it's about essence. Their entire plan depended on finding a human crack in an unshakable structure, but the feed didn't just show the absence of cracks, it showed a foundation they couldn't touch. That's why they're terrified. The cameras didn't just fail to expose you, they exposed them, their envy, their schemes, their smallness against the scale of your presence. In trying to reveal your weakness, they ended up broadcasting your sovereignty. And now the footage lives as a permanent record of the very thing they wanted to deny. Your authority is real, and it isn't going anywhere. Number 5, the recording turned observation into submission. That's the power shift they never anticipated. Surveillance is supposed to give control to the watcher. It's meant to make the person being watched feel exposed, vulnerable, and at a disadvantage. But in your case, the opposite happened. They thought they were in the position of power, collecting information, studying you like a subject. Yet the longer they watched, the more that sense of control slipped out of their hands. The cameras didn't just capture you, they redefined the dynamic. Instead of making you smaller, the footage made you larger. Every frame amplified your presence and reduced theirs, not because you performed for it, but because you didn't. The recording highlighted your composure, your steadiness, your unshakable calm, all of which contrasted brutally with their anxious need to monitor and control. Watching you didn't make them smarter or more strategic. It made them aware of how outclassed they really were. This is what true power does. It reverses the gaze. It makes the watcher feel like the one being examined. As they stared at the footage, waiting for a slip, they began to feel exposed themselves. They saw not only who you are, but also who they aren't. And that realization turned their surveillance into a kind of silent surrender. The backfire wasn't just psychological, it was symbolic. They wanted proof that you were ordinary, predictable, or unstable. What they got was proof that you were in control without even trying. The act of spying became an act of submission because the footage revealed a hierarchy they didn't want to admit. You weren't reacting to them. You weren't bending to the pressure. You weren't even acknowledging their presence. And in doing so, you made them irrelevant in their own operation. By the time they understood what they were seeing, it was too late. The recording had already flipped the script. What began as their attempt to dominate became their unintentional confession of inferiority. They thought they were capturing you. In truth, they were capturing the exact moment their power dissolved. And the more they watched, the more they shrank inside your shadow. Number 6. Power leaks through the mundane moments. That's where its true shape becomes visible. Anyone can look impressive when the lights are on, when a crowd is watching, or when everything is staged to impress. But the footage of you didn't rely on spectacle. It didn't need a speech, an entrance, or a grand gesture. It caught you in the quiet, everyday rhythms, the times most people slip into autopilot. And instead of weakness, it revealed something far more striking. Discipline woven so deeply into your life, it had become instinct. That's what unsettled them. They were looking for proof that your authority was an act, something you could only turn on when the moment called for it. But what the cameras showed was a different story. Even in the smallest, plainest moments, you carried yourself with the same calm precision. The way you moved, the way you handled details, the way you used time, none of it was wasted, and none of it was accidental. It wasn't performance, it was practice. It was character built into muscle memory. This is the kind of power that can't be faked. Staged grandeur is easy to produce. Expensive settings, rehearsed lines, and choreographed appearances can fool people for a while. But the mundane exposes truth. It shows who you are when nobody's supposed to be paying attention. And what the footage showed was that your power isn't something you switch on. It's something you live. It's not tied to an audience, it's tied to who you are at the core. That's what they didn't expect. They thought the cameras would reveal you at your weakest, catching you off guard or unprepared. Instead, the footage showed you at your most natural, and even there, your presence outshone anything they could manufacture. That's because real authority isn't about appearances. It's about consistency. And consistency lives in the small things. By the time they realized what they were seeing, it was too late. The quiet moments had already exposed the depth of your strength. No theatrics, no pretension, just unshakable command flowing through the ordinary. That's why the footage unnerved them so deeply. It proved your power isn't situational. It's structural. It's in you, even when no one's supposed to be looking. Number 7. They realized they were witnessing untrainable instinct. That's the moment their curiosity turned into fear. People are used to skills. Skills can be taught, imitated, reverse engineered. Even confidence can be faked with enough practice. But instinct? That's different. Instinct is not learned. It's lived. It's coded so deeply into someone that it becomes second nature, appearing effortless because it is effortless. That's what the footage revealed about you. Not just what you do, but the way you do it, and how naturally it flows from you. This was the part that shook them the most. They weren't terrified of your actions in themselves. Actions can be analyzed, steps can be mapped, strategies can be stolen. But the way you moved, the way you decided, the way you responded without hesitation, that wasn't coming from a manual or a plan. It was coming from somewhere deeper. They were watching a person who doesn't try to be powerful, who doesn't attempt to lead or dominate. You just do. And that kind of authenticity can't be manufactured. In the footage, every small detail became a revelation. The timing of your pauses, the steadiness in your reactions, the ability to make decisions without looking for cues or validation. None of it felt rehearsed or deliberate. It felt like breathing. That's why they couldn't dismiss it. You weren't showing off a skill, you were showing a nature. And that's something no training can give them. This realization is dangerous for them because it exposes their own limits. If your power had been learned, they could have learned it too. If it had been borrowed, they could have stolen it. But instinct makes you untouchable. It's not just rare, it's impossible to replicate. And once they saw that truth, they couldn't unsee it. That's the heart of their fear. The recording didn't just display your actions, it revealed their futility. They're not competing with a performance or a strategy. They're competing with something encoded into your very being. and no amount of training, plotting, or surveillance can copy that. It's not what you do, it's who you are. And that's why, as they watched, they felt not just impressed, they felt powerless. Number 8, the lens betrayed their narrative. That was the moment the entire balance shifted. They had built their confidence on the idea that technology would be their weapon, that the cameras, the recordings, and the surveillance would finally strip away your image and reveal the flaws they were certain existed. They trusted the lens as a neutral witness, something they could control, edit, and manipulate to serve their story. But what they didn't expect was that the same lens would turn against them. Instead of exposing weakness, it captured clarity. Instead of humiliation, it recorded proof of composure. This is what makes the betrayal so sharp. The lens didn't just fail them, it vindicated you. It turned their trap into your testimony. Every frame they collected became a piece of evidence they couldn't twist, a story they couldn't rewrite. They thought the footage would hand them a narrative of power lost, but it ended up documenting power affirmed. That's the risk of reality. It doesn't always cooperate with the script. In the recording, every gesture, every silence, every decision stood in contrast to the story they had prepared. They wanted the footage to show cracks. Instead, it showed sovereignty. They wanted proof of chaos. Instead, it showed control. They wanted to undermine your authority. Instead, it crowned it. The very device they believed would strip you bare became a mirror reflecting their own miscalculation. What makes this even more powerful is that you didn't orchestrate it. You weren't performing for the cameras. You weren't trying to create a legend. The footage is raw, unscripted, and unfiltered. And that's exactly why it carries weight. Because no one can accuse reality of bias when it's their own tool doing the recording. Now, every time they press play, they're confronted with their failure. They thought they had captured your downfall. They actually documented your rise. The lens they believed was neutral betrayed them by telling the truth. And the truth, once recorded, can't be undone. That's the power they underestimated. Not just your presence, but the inevitability of it being seen for what it is. Their technology didn't expose you. It glorified you. And now it stands as their silent confession. Number 9, they saw presence, not posturing. That was the first crack in their certainty. They were prepared to catch someone acting, rehearsing, or playing a part, because that's what they understand power to be, a performance. But when they reviewed the footage, there was nothing artificial to cling to. Every movement you made had weight, a kind of gravity that didn't feel staged or choreographed. It didn't look like someone trying to be in control. It looked like someone who simply was. And that difference was devastating to them. Posturing always has tells, forced gestures, exaggerated pauses, a kind of stiffness that betrays the effort behind the image. But presence feels inevitable. It's not a role, it's a state. It shows in the way someone walks, speaks, listens, and even stands still. It's the quiet confidence of a person who doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. That's what the footage revealed about you. You weren't moving through your environment to prove a point. You were moving through it because it already belonged to you. What made it so unnerving for them was how unpolished it all was. Nothing about it seemed manufactured or timed for effect, yet everything still carried weight. They couldn't dismiss it as acting because there was no performance energy to accuse you of. It was the kind of natural command that slips under people's defenses. Even the silences in the footage were loud, not because you were trying to create tension, but because your calm made the space feel charged. That's what they weren't prepared for. Posturing can be countered. It can be mocked, undermined, or exposed. But presence can't be touched because it doesn't depend on tactics. It's not built on someone else's perception. It's built on identity. Watching the footage, they were forced to confront the reality that your authority wasn't situational or conditional. It wasn't something you put on. It was something you carry everywhere, without trying. In the end, the recording didn't just fail to reveal a performance. It revealed inevitability. It showed them that your movements weren't a display. They were a declaration, and the more they watched, the clearer it became. They weren't witnessing someone playing a role. They were witnessing someone embodying power so fully that even on tape it felt undeniable. Number 10, the camera caught their powerlessness too. That's the part they didn't see coming. They thought the footage would frame you as an object of scrutiny, someone under the microscope. But in every single frame, it did the opposite. You weren't just present, you were centered. The focus, the lighting, the weight of the scene all settled on you, not because it was staged that way, but because that's where the natural center of gravity was. And around you, they appeared like extras in a story they thought they were directing. This is what real presence does. It rearranges the room. The person who carries true authority doesn't have to demand attention. They draw it without effort. That's what the recording revealed. Even when they were physically there, moving, talking, trying to assert themselves, the camera rendered them as background noise, out of focus, blurred at the edges, not because of any technical trick, but because their energy was small compared to yours. The lens simply showed the truth, who mattered in that space and who didn't. What's devastating for them is that this wasn't just a visual accident. It was a symbolic exposure. They weren't the hunters capturing a target. They were the audience to a force they couldn't match. Every time they watched the footage, they were forced to see themselves not as the ones in control, but as spectators. They were literally watching their own irrelevance play out, second by second. And that's the irony of the whole thing. They built this system of surveillance to shrink you, to reduce you to an object, to catch you unguarded. But instead, the footage showed them as small, peripheral, almost decorative, like shadows flickering on the edges of someone else's stage. The camera didn't just vindicate you, it exposed them. It made their lack of power visible and undeniable. That's why the recording unsettles them so deeply. It isn't just proof of your strength, it's proof of their weakness. It's a visual hierarchy that can't be edited out. And now, every time they replay it, they're reminded of the one thing they never wanted to face. In the story they tried to control, they were never the main characters. They were only bystanders, fading into the background of your presence. Number 11. It wasn't just surveillance, it was a coronation. That's the part that unsettles them most, because it means their own actions backfired in a way they can never undo. Surveillance is supposed to be cold, clinical, and controlling. It's meant to strip someone of dignity, to frame them as a subject, not a sovereign. But the footage of you reversed that dynamic completely. Every frame they recorded became a brick in the throne they were unknowingly building for you. Instead of exposing you, they elevated you. What they didn't realize is that watching someone with genuine authority is never a neutral act. When real presence is recorded, it doesn't shrink, it expands. It fills the frame, it rewrites the power dynamics, and it forces even the silent observer to participate. That's what happened here. They were so focused on capturing something damaging that they failed to see how every second of their footage was working against their narrative. In trying to strip you down, they were dressing you in legitimacy. In trying to diminish you, they were documenting your rise. It's the ultimate irony. They thought their eyes would make you smaller, but their gaze became your crown. They thought their cameras would reduce you to an object, but the footage transformed you into a symbol, a focal point, a center of gravity. They were never just recording, they were testifying. Every moment they pressed record was an unspoken admission. This person matters enough to watch. This person's every move holds weight. This person is worth documenting. That's not surveillance anymore. That's ceremony. And now, they can't take it back. The footage lives as proof, not just of your strength, but of their role in recognizing it. They didn't plan a coronation, but that's exactly what they staged. They built the altar, they lit the lights, they pointed the cameras, and then they sat in silence while the recording captured your composure. By the time they understood what was happening, it was already history. That's why it cut so deep for them. They didn't just fail to expose you, they crowned you. They legitimized you with their own efforts, and now the footage stands as a permanent record of the moment they handed you the power they wanted to take away. Number 12. The footage made them confront the uncomfortable math. For so long, they had comforted themselves with the illusion that numbers meant power, that plotting together, whispering in groups, and building alliances could outweigh the force of one individual. They counted heads and assumed that meant influence. But when they played back the recording, the math stopped adding up. In every frame, the crowd seemed smaller, weaker, and less relevant, while you appeared larger, clearer, and unshakably centered. It wasn't a trick of the lens. It was a revelation. Numbers without conviction are just noise. That's what they realized as they watched you. A room full of people can agree on a strategy, but if none of them carries true identity, their combined weight doesn't equal real power. The footage forced them to see this truth in high definition. You didn't need a group behind you. You didn't need a stage or an army or even words. You had something that outlasts numbers, a grounded, unshakable sense of self. And the cameras caught it, frame by frame. This is what rattled them most. They believed they had strength because they had numbers. But as they stared at the recording, they saw those numbers for what they really were, fragile, hollow, dependent on each other's validation. You, on the other hand, stood alone, yet complete. Your stillness in the footage made their movement look frantic. Your calm made their noise sound desperate. The math was no longer in their favor, because no amount of plotting can outweigh a person whose presence doesn't waver. That's why the footage unnerved them so deeply. It stripped away their illusion of power in the same moment it confirmed yours. They saw themselves as a collective force, but on camera they looked like a crowd without direction, while you looked like the axis everything else revolved around. Numbers can create pressure, but they can't create gravity. You had the gravity. And gravity, unlike pressure, doesn't need to prove itself. It simply pulls everything into alignment. When the recording ended, they couldn't unsee it. The math was no longer comforting, it was damning. They had the majority, but you had the substance. And for the first time, they understood that substance always outweighs numbers, no matter how many people fill the room. Number 13, they weren't afraid of what you did. They were afraid of what you'd become. That's the part the recording revealed, and the part they can't unsee. Your actions in the footage didn't frighten them, because actions can be analyzed, explained, or even countered. What unsettled them was the undercurrent beneath it all, the way your composure, your discipline, and your presence hinted at something larger, something still unfolding. The cameras didn't just capture you as you are. They caught the outlines of who you're becoming. That's the kind of fear that's hard to name. When they watched you move, they weren't just seeing a person. They were seeing momentum. The steadiness of your routines, the way you handled pressure, the clarity in your decisions, all of it pointed to a trajectory they couldn't control. They didn't see a moment to exploit. They saw a future they couldn't stop. And that's what made their stomachs drop. Because while they can fight a single event, they can't fight inevitability. In the footage, every ordinary action carried a kind of foreshadowing. It was subtle but undeniable. Your habits, your timing, even your silences, all suggested someone who isn't static, someone growing into a level of power that won't be contained by their current plans. That's why their schemes feel so small now. They built them to confront who you were, not who you're becoming. And the recording made them realize the gap between their assumptions and your reality is only going to widen. This is why the footage is more than evidence. It's a prophecy. It's not just proof of your strength in the present. It's a glimpse of your inevitability in the future. They thought surveillance would freeze you in place, but it ended up documenting your evolution. Every frame showed not just stability, but momentum, not just authority, but growth. And now they're afraid in a way they can't admit. Because they didn't just watch a person, they watched a rising force. They didn't just record a moment, they recorded a future. The footage told them what they never wanted to believe. Your trajectory is beyond their reach, and their plans will never be fast enough to outrun what you're becoming. Number 14, the camera didn't capture you, it captured history. That's why the footage feels different from everything else they've ever recorded. Surveillance is supposed to be sterile, objective, and unremarkable. But what they ended up with was something alive, something with weight. It didn't feel like a file to be stored away. It felt like an artifact. Each frame carried a sense of permanence, as if the lens wasn't just documenting a person but documenting a shift. They thought they were gathering evidence. They were actually archiving a moment that will be looked back on as the start of something they couldn't stop. What played back wasn't surveillance footage. It was the first draft of a legend. Legends don't announce themselves when they're happening. They reveal themselves later when people look back and realize they were witnessing a turning point. That's exactly what the recording did. It caught you not in a staged moment of grandeur, but in your natural state, steady, unbothered, and already carrying the outlines of a future that will rewrite the context of everything they thought they knew. That's what unsettles them so deeply. If it had just been evidence of an act or an event, they could have filed it away, dismissed it, or used it. But history can't be manipulated once it's documented in its raw form. And the footage they have isn't neutral anymore. It's narrative. It's the beginning of a story they didn't plan to tell, and now it exists without their permission. They're holding the proof of a reality they tried to deny, and the weight of that is crushing. This is the true power of what the cameras caught. They didn't just fail to expose you, they immortalized you. They turned a private act of surveillance into a public testament. What they have now is not leverage. It's a record of inevitability. They can't erase it because to erase it would be to admit its significance. And so the recording lives on, not as a file in a folder, but as a living piece of your myth. It's no longer their footage. It's your history. And every time they replay it, they're forced to watch the legend they tried to prevent take shape, frame by frame. From the moment the cameras started rolling, everything they thought they knew about power, presence, and control began to unravel. They came with a plan, armed with numbers, schemes, and a quiet confidence that they could dissect, expose, and diminish. What they found instead was something far more unshakable, far more commanding, and far more undeniable, the essence of you. Every frame of that recording did not show weakness or vulnerability. It revealed a force that could not be rehearsed, copied, or contained. They weren't witnessing a performance. They were witnessing inevitability, a sovereign presence that exists beyond manipulation or opinion. The footage exposed truths they couldn't deny. It revealed that true authority doesn't shout, it doesn't need applause, and it doesn't bend to scrutiny. It exists in quiet moments, in instinctive decisions, in the calm precision of someone who carries discipline and identity as naturally as breathing. Every action you took, every pause you allowed, Every silent gesture radiated power so pure that it made even the most confident observers feel small, irrelevant, and exposed. What they thought was their weapon, surveillance, became the instrument of your vindication. Every second they pressed record added to a record that glorified, legitimized, and crowned you in ways they never intended. They realized, too late, that they weren't afraid of what you had done. They were afraid of what you would become. The recording didn't just show the present, it hinted at your trajectory, a future their strategies cannot reach, a force they cannot anticipate or control. And in that footage, history was written. Not a legend in progress, but the first draft of one that they never wanted to exist. They watched, powerless, as their own attempts to diminish you became proof of your undeniable rise, your sovereignty, and your authority. So remember this: true power doesn't seek validation, it doesn't require an audience, and it cannot be taken. What was captured on camera is proof of one truth above all: you are not here to perform. You are here to exist, to dominate without effort, and to redefine the very meaning of influence. Every observer, every plotter, every skeptic is left only with the recording, the undeniable testimony of your presence, your instinct, and your unshakable trajectory. If this message resonated, make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay connected to more revelations like this. Like, comment, and share your thoughts, because power witnessed is power multiplied, and your engagement is part of the movement we're building together. Don't just watch the rise, be part of the recognition of what's unstoppable. Stay blessed always.